So the issue with gluten. So gluten is getting a bad rap. So gluten is the popular thing right now. And if you ever notice us Americans are sort of addicted to these like food trends. There's like the fat-free craze and the diet craze and the gluten-free and now dairy and blah. It's so freaking exhausting. But the issue with gluten, some of the issues with gluten. So first, gluten is the protein found in wheat, rye, and barley, and it's that glue that makes bread stick together. So if any of you have made bread, it's like that, you can pull the bread apart and you can knead it and dough it, and that's like that like gluey thing. That's what gluten is doing. It's found in cookies, crackers, breads, pasta, cereal, sauces, dressings, cakes, pastries, bagels, baked goods, soups, a lot of things. So what's the problem? The problem is this I have seen trigger the inflammatory process, again, triggering that omega-6. A lot of times gluten is paired with, because it's in processed foods, it's paired with those high omega-6 oils to keep whatever that processed food stable. So it's kind of like a double whammy. So this is super fascinating. So what gluten and dairy both can do, well, inflammatory foods in general. So the cells that line our gut are called tight junction cells, and they're tight for a reason, because we don't want food particles floating up into our circulatory system. So they're tight junctions, but occasionally they need to separate because sometimes there's injuries that happen in our GI tract. And so when there is a little injury down here called Lucky Charms, picking on Lucky Charms for the past few days. So Lucky Charms triggers an inflammatory process. The immune cells are up here in the circulatory system. So the tight junction cells, so there's an injury down here and it triggers this door to open. So the door goes, and the immune globulins, it's one of my favorite words, immune globulins come down into the gastrointestinal system and heal. They do their little job, and then they go back up through the door, and then the door shuts. And that's it. That's if Susie Q ate Lucky Charms once in a while. But the problem is we're eating inflammatory foods 3 to 4 to 5 times a day. And so these tight junctions are not so tight. They're like, the door keeps getting opened. And finally they're like, listen, we'll just stay open so that these immune cells can keep going down, and we're going to stop doing our job, like opening and closing, because we're getting triggered so much to stay open so that the immune cells can come down into the gastrointestinal system and heal. So the tight junctions are not tight. It's called leaky gut. And then it's not just a one-way street. So immune cells are going down in here to repair, and then food particles are going up in here, and then the immune cells up in here are going, food, what are you doing in here? And food's like, well, the door was open. And then the immune cells are like, well, you're not me, so I am sorry, I have to tag you, broccoli. And then that person gets a food allergy test, and they're reacting to gluten, dairy, broccoli, cranberries, nuts, eggs. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys have done this. And then you're told as a human, great, here's this huge giant list that you're allergic to or reacting to, so stop eating those foods. And there's no talk about, well, cool, but these foods we've been eating a really long time, like eggs and broccoli. So am I never going to eat eggs and broccoli again? No. I want you to eat eggs and broccoli. What I want you to do is heal your gut. So taking out some of those triggering foods for a short period of time while you're simultaneously healing your gut with bone broth and L-glutamine and probiotics and whole food eating and local eating, like all of these things that you can do to help heal your gastrointestinal system. And then you can start reintroducing those whole foods like eggs and broccoli and continue to avoid the inflammatory foods that trigger this leaky gut syndrome. Hope this is making sense. So you guys also can Google, if you type in intestinal villi gluten inflammation and Google image that, then what you'll see is that our intestines, again, aren't just a hose. There's a hose with all these finger-like things to increase that surface area for absorption. What gluten does in inflammatory foods is it mows these down so there's less surface area for you to absorb your food. So one of the number one things that I look for with specifically women who I think have gluten intolerance, who are up in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, is osteoporosis and osteopenia. Why? Because they're not absorbing the minerals that they need, because gluten has done this to their villi, decreased that surface area, decreased their absorption. So they're not absorbing the amount of nutrients they need to build themselves, specifically bone. So again, the importance of avoiding inflammatory foods and processed foods, I can't stress enough. Eat local. So that's one of the problems with gluten. The other issue with gluten is that if you look at proteins under a microscope, they look like, because remember, gluten's a protein, so they look like cat hairballs. And I know it's a lovely image. And so the stomach acid unwinds that hairball, chops it up in little pieces called amino acids, sends it down to the small intestine, where then it's absorbed, and so we can build us. Because remember what protein does, it builds building blocks of you. The issue with gluten is that it can cross the blood-brain barrier, it can bind to opiate receptors in the brain and trigger all sorts of mood alterations, brain fog, depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, autism. The other thing that it can do is the gluten molecule, the gluten amino acid can block the thyroid receptor on the cells in the body. And so that can also trigger hypothyroidism, or a systemic version of hypothyroidism. So you better believe all of my hypothyroid patients do not eat gluten. Like, these are the times where I'm like, you just don't. Like, these are the times when I tell people what I really think about what they should or shouldn't be eating, because most of the time I want it to be up to you guys. Like, I really want to empower you to, like, give you the information, go play a game called Avoid Gluten and see what happens. Versus my patients, like my hypothyroid patients, where I'm like, don't eat gluten. Like, it really is not serving you in any way, and it's triggering all the stuff that you're feeling, and you feel horrible. So really encouraging people to stay away from that because of that gluten and thyroid issue. The issue with dairy, just like gluten, it'll trigger in that inflammatory response. It can also trigger that leaky gut issue. It can also bind to the opiate receptors in the brain and trigger mood alterations. I've noticed over the years, and this is not 100% across the board, but I have noticed that the acne issue, like skin issues from the cheekbones down, if there's lots of acne issues here, it's mostly a dairy problem. If it's the cheekbones up, it's mostly a gluten problem. So again, not 100% across the board, just kind of food for thought.